Greetings and welcome to the introduction to astronomy. In this week's exploration of the solar system, we are going to talk about the Viking mission, which included two spacecraft that landed on the surface of Mars. So what were the Viking spacecraft? Well, they were Viking 1 and 2, and they were launched in August and September of 1975, respectively. They reached Mars about a year later in the summer of 1976, landing about a month after their arrival. So there were actually two components to each of these. So Viking 1 had an orbiter and a lander, as did Viking 2. So the orbiter remained in orbit, as you might expect. The lander was what went down to the surface to be able to look at samples and try to collect samples and analyze them. The job of the orbiters was to map the surface of the planet Mars and to actually kind of scout out landing sites. We had ideas of where we wanted to land, but of course you can see far more detail when you're there. So to be able to find out what the best portions of them were. Now, the whole idea and a big part of the landers was a search for life. So we were looking for the possibility of life on Mars. Could life exist someplace else? Mars has always been one of the biggest places that we think of when we look for life. And that's because it is the most Earth-like. Now, often people could think of Venus because Venus is similar in size to Earth. Mars is a lot smaller. But in the past, conditions on Mars were much closer to what they are on Earth. So quite possible that Mars could have had life. And in preparation for that, the landers were completely sterilized so that there would be no contamination from Earth living organisms. Any kind of bacterial or any other contamination that could have been there was completely sterilized out. Now, the whole idea here was then to dig under the surface. Why? Well, the Martian surface is sterilized. So here we see the surface where it landed, and you can actually see the landing pad of the mechanism there. And you can see some of the rocks there. Now, the idea was to dig underneath because, as I've said, ultraviolet light from the sun will sterilize the surface. So any living organisms on the surface would not survive that. But under the surface, it doesn't take a lot of material to shield from the ultraviolet light. So digging down just a small amount would then allow for uncontaminated material that hasn't been constantly bombarded by ultraviolet light from the sun. So what was done was to scoop out material, as we can see here. There are a number of different sections where it's been scooped out. And you can see some of those from the robotic arm here that would then reach out and scoop material and bring that into the craft, into a mini laboratory sent there. And the whole idea again was searching for life. And how do you look for life? Well, one of the ways you can do it is look for signs of metabolism. So if you put that soil from the Mars in a container with various nutrients and see if it reacts with any of them, that if it tries to consume them, and there we can see signs of metabolism there. The results were either negative or inconclusive. And one of the problems is that it can be very difficult to tell the difference between very complex chemical reactions which may occur and very simple biological reactions. So the results are still being studied today, even decades later. And the landers and orbiters have long since been decommissioned, and in fact the Viking 1 lander functioned until November of 1982. So lasting about 6 years on the surface of Mars. So let's go ahead and finish up this with our summary. And what we've looked at today is that the Viking 1 and 2 craft were the first craft to land on Mars and to be studied for life. That was the big thing, is the experiments to search for the possibility of life on Mars. Results were inconclusive or negative, but we still analyze what we got out of this to this day. So that concludes this week's exploration of the solar system on the Viking 1 and 2 spacecraft. We'll be back again next week for another exploration of the solar system. So until then, have a great day, everyone. And I will see you in class.